Order. It is 8/18/2023. We're here to discuss Navigation Center potential funding sources in support of AR 2023-182S as amended. Before we dive into the content specifically, Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make a disclosure. So the issue around the Navigation Center has been one that's been long and pending. I am the Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. Earlier attempts to move this project forward, the coalition did provide technical assistance, particularly on design and other questions, but has not been involved in the last several iterations of this project. In fact, I don't know exactly anything about what the plan is. That said, the coalition, if it is asked for technical assistance with regard to this item, I would need to know of that intention, and then I would ask to be excused. So I don't know what members' intention is with regard to needing information from the coalition. Otherwise, it's my intention, unless the chair deems otherwise, to go ahead and participate with regard to this item. So I wanted to pose that question to the membership, and then from there, leave it to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The word that comes to mind is speculative. There is a possibility that the coalition may be called upon to help support if the project moves forward, but there is no link or leg to the coalition at this time. And
well, that was my question to the membership. Is there any intention to ask anything between now and the decision date from us about this item? That I don't know.
Again, speculative. I can't reach into the minds of my peers and understand, but the question has now been asked. So that is before the members in the room.
I do not. This is personally me, Anna.
Okay, Ms. Brawley. Anyone else wish to opine? Ms. Bronga?
I don't understand. Like when I asked at the meeting, you couldn't answer any questions about homelessness. So if you couldn't answer any questions about it at that, maybe you should be excused from this.
Yep. In that situation, you were asking me in my role as coalition while I was sitting here at this table in my position as an assembly member, and I keep really bright lines with regard to that. So you could ask me questions in my role offline, and then I still am bound by the Open Meetings Act.
So anyone have strong feelings? Again, I feel, Mr. Martinez.
I think if the situation comes up, we take action at that time. I think all voices matter at the start of the conversation, and there's no clear conflict at the start for me.
So thank you, Madam Clerk, for sharing this letter. Again, I believe it's speculative. There's no intent that's been expressed to specifically ask the coalition at this time between now and a vote on the discussion on Tuesday from the coalition. And so these questions are really targeted to the administration on the potential of this program. So I'm going to determine at this time that there isn't a conflict. And if anyone wishes to make a motion to override the ruling of the chair, now is your opportunity. Thank you. And we have been working hard for the last 3 years because there was a time when we were handing out conflicts like candy, where if there was even a potential hint that somebody had anything to do with the business of something somewhere off in the horizon, that we would say no. And it got to the point where members weren't voting on matters, and the charter directs us, the code directs us to vote. And so at this time, I'm glad that the members are narrowing in that impulse to make sure that it is a very specific and tangible personal or financial conflict that outweighs the interest in the member voting. So with that said, Member Brawley, oh wait, we need to do introductions. I skipped that whole part of the deal. So we'll roll back the agenda. Mr. Martinez.
George Martinez.
Kevin Cross.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Salatel.
Christopher Constant on the phone. Mr. Salt.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. And we also have from the administration,
Mario Bird, Chief of Staff. Lance Wilbur, Community Development.
Shay Troop, Maintenance and Operations.
I did that wrong.
Greg Souley, Development Services.
And Shay, would you do that again?
Shea Troop, Maintenance and Operations.
Alexis Johnson, Homeless Coordinator.
Kent Cole Hayes, Municipal Manager.
Thanks. We also have our legislative staff, attorneys Gates and Hurt. We have a bunch of people in the public in the audience as well. So, Ms. Brawley, you asked for the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And I will be very brief because I want to give as much time as possible for the administration to present their project. When I introduced the S version for this proposal, as I stated in the memo at that time and later in the work session on June 16th, it seems like what's really needed is to highlight the key questions that the assembly should be asking and getting responses to from the administration to determine the feasibility of this project. So I just want to state, I think we all recognize homelessness is a major issue in our city. We need to be doing better than we are now. We need things like year-round shelter, and we need to decide what those look like. And so I want to basically separate that kind of general statement that I think we all agree on with the specific question before us, which is this project feasible and how do we get it done and how do we pay for it? And so I want to point folks to the letter that went from Chair Constant and Member Rivera asking some specific questions intended to inform the Assembly. And then also to say, this has been the top priority of the administration since June 2021, way before I was on this body. We, the Assembly, have seen multiple iterations of this, certainly before I started. And so I think we really just need to understand what is the plan for this project. Again, how will it be paid for? How will it be operated? And then that will help the Assembly make a decision on at Tuesday's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh boy. So having read through the AM, I can tell you I have some strong feelings about some of the funding that has been identified. Promises made to the community that are suddenly being reneged upon. I look forward to going through these as a line, and I'm going to raise some hell on behalf of my constituents when we get there. But that said, Mr. Wilbur, you asked me the question, what order would we be going through the questions? There was a letter that was emailed to both Mayor Bronson and Manager Colhase, which expressed some specific questions. That's been handed out. There should be some items available on the table in the back, and hopefully it's been posted on the website. Mr. Wilbur, you asked what order should we take the questions in, and I didn't have them in front of me, so I'll ask you, what order would you prefer to take them in?
Through the chair, I think what we could do is from community development, we are responsible for the budget for the building and some of the items that are related to the permitting. I've got both the acting directors for maintenance and operations and development services here with me. So if we could, and ours would be questions 1, 5, and 6. And then we can tell you basically where we are on the project itself and if funding was available, how we would advance from the actual construction of it. So I would encourage us to maybe do that first, and then you can hear from my team. And then the order of after those, Mr. Chairman, either money or operations, your call.
All right, thank you. So lead the way, Mr. Wilbur.
All right, thank you. Well, we appreciate the questions. We're glad an opportunity to refer to those. Up on the screen is an outline of a little bit more detail to the questions, the question about a little more detail and feasible budget for completing the capital project to a point where it's ready to stand up for operations, including the construction cost, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so what we've prepared here is we've taken the documents that we had prepared at 65%, which is to the point where the project was basically put on pause in October. And we took the original estimates that were done for each one of these sort of levels of service in the or contracting sheets. So for those of you who are in the industry, maybe starting on the left-hand side, that code is a code that we use in the Construction Specifications Institute. So it doesn't matter if you're building a fire station or a commercial building or a navigation center, these are the types of categories that a project would be bid. So those are the categories that we used. Mr. Troop can share any detail on those. So basically, without going to a lot of detail, we added up these items here, And for each one of these items, we also took into account the money that we'd have already spent on the shelter that's already been purchased, the money that's already been spent on the materials, the electrical, the plumbing that's actually being stored out in Eagle River. And then we also took out the cost of the site work and the foundation work that's already in place. So picking the project up from there is where this brings us to. So I'll just quickly go down the list and just
Can I
point
ask a
out
quick
that.
clarifying question, Mr. Wilbur?
Oh, sure, Mr. Chairman.
You just said that you removed the previous expenses, the groundwork and all of that. So all of that work would be in addition to this number.
That's correct. That's money that we've already spent.
So if the previous number was $4.5 million that we just settled with the Hickle company at 2 million plus the tent and all that other stuff, it's roughly 17 to 18 million dollars we're talking.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Proceed.
So I'll just point out a couple things as it's going down the list, and then I'll go to the bottom. One of the things that's not included in our original package was equipment and furnishings. And equipment is generally things like if we need something in the building, if we need a special piece of equipment to operate it, a forklift or something like that, that's not part of original bid package. It wasn't there. The furnishings were not part of the original package, so we don't have an estimate of what that would be, depending on the number of spaces that would have for build out, depending on the number of offices and spaces that you would need. That would be an additional cost above the cost to actually stand the structure up. And this cost includes a complete navigation center. It's everything in it: heat, rooms, dining, bathrooms, everything else that it would need to be a fully functional navigation center. It's not the complete. And we looked at what the savings would be if we just created the structure and didn't put all of those pieces in there. We might be able to save probably about $500,000, but we would actually have to come back and do those things later. So that's something that we looked at.
So Mr. Wilbur, just quickly, I'm going to ask us to be very careful with our words. When you say navigation center, that's like shorthand for the navigation center and the mass shelter, right? Because the navigation center it's become a code word for all things to all people. But really what we're talking about is a shelter with a navigation function connected to it.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Chairman.
let us
You're
be
correct.
careful with those terms.
Thank you. So a couple highlights that I would bring to the attention of the Assembly is, as we move down this list, the cost to actually that we believe to finish it based on the 65% drawings is roughly, the cost of all of those materials is about $8 million, $7.7 million. And then we add in the things that we know that we're going to do on every project, which is there's going to be some expendables, there's a bond fee. We put in a 12% contingency in this thing. That might be a little high, but we think it's pretty reasonable depending on how we move forward on the project. So that is an estimate that we used based on our experience in other work and giving the stage of it. Then the other important piece is, so if we add those things up, the cost of the project would be at 65% would be about $9.7 million. But this estimate is based on numbers from last October. So we're going to add a 15% inflation to that number because things are going up. Materials are going up. Some things are going to go up by 10. Some things are going to go up by 20. This is our best estimate on that price going up. The other thing that we've done is, as part of the resolution, the Assembly was interested in a third-party review. We've talked to a couple folks. We found a third-party outfit that's willing to do that. They've given us an estimate. It's going to be around $150,000 to project management this thing over roughly a 6-month period. So that's what the $150,000 is. And so if that gets us to about 11.4 million. However, as I mentioned about this time last year, if we do this in the winter, it's going to cost more. And the number that we gave you last year was roughly $1 million. The number's still pretty good. If, in general terms, we're going to spend roughly $450,000 just in extra heat and prep over the winter period. We'll probably spend another, $250 to $300 in labor in the wintertime. The other variable in this is that after December, if we find ourselves in a situation where we have to pay for storage, we kind of factored that, a little bit of that in there as well. So whether it's the storage for the structure or finding a place as we're looking to relocate the material that we have. So if it was done in the summer, basically during the construction season, it's 11.4. If we decide to do it in the wintertime, it's going to be 12.4. As I expressed to you in June, the number we provided to you was 12.2. And that was 11.5 to stand up the full structure, about $200,000 to ship it. We believe that we can include that. We included that into the price of in the construction. And then we gave you an estimate at the time of about $500,000 for project management. Shay's been able to work with a couple folks that we can get it to roughly, 150,000. So we've done as best work we can based on where the project stopped last October at 65% to make some adjustments to these costs and give you a little bit more detail in each particular category based on the industry. So hopefully this answers the question that you had there. And hopefully it's helpful to the question that you were seeking. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So then you suggested you wanted to go in order. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I do have two questions. First, Ms. Alato.
Thank you. On the list, the bond fee, can you explain what that is a little bit more? Because we didn't bond for this, so I'm curious why there's a bond fee.
Excellent question. When we hire a contractor, we require them to get a bond in the event that they don't fulfill the contract. We are able to.
So we're going to pay for their bond.
That's part of the cost of the project.
Okay,
It's
and then,
it's what in every single capital project we do,
Okay.
they hire a bond and it's part of their cost.
we don't always get these cost breakdowns, so good to know. And then the all risk insurance and the GL director cyber insurance, is that for just construction? Those are insurance costs we're going to pay for instruction or for construction of the facility?
Those are costs that the general contractor will have to incur. The GL is general liability insurance. I mean, those are each a key word, but they're costs that the general contractor will have that he passes on to the customer.
Okay. And then finally, there's no cost for equipment or furnishings. So what's the plan to put things in the structure?
Ms. Johnson.
Through the chair to Ms. Alatel, when we presented our PowerPoint in June, we did include a $395,000 in a one-time operating cost ask for furnishings and fixtures. So it was included in that presentation, not in the capital stack.
So we could add $395,000 if we're looking at what it would take to furnish this in addition to construct it.
Through the chair to Ms. Alatel, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
I would say plus 15%. As that's our basis for inflation that we're using as a baseline. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I'm a bit surprised if there is a 65% design that we haven't basically been given what that looks like. And perhaps that's because it was before I was on the body. Because I just have basic questions about square footage, the floor plan, because I think some of those things can help explain the intent for this facility and what it would look like. But my specific question is, what is the planned shelter occupancy? And please include regular occupancy and surge occupancy.
I believe the regular occupancy is 150 with a surge of 50 for a total of 200 in the current floor plan or layout.
Thank you.
So I have a question on the order of the thing. So, Mr. Wilbur, when we ordered the tent, there was a long conversation about reducing the size. And I have heard reports that we, in fact, didn't do that. What we did was we ordered the large format plan and we just went with it and said, we'll do the smaller amount of people in it and have the bigger building. Do you know if that's true?
Through the chair, I do know that originally there was some interest in ordering somewhere around a 60,000 square foot structure. And I think this one here is closer to 30,000. And that just had to do with the budget that the project team had in mind at the time and what we could actually do, what the size of the structure we could do at the time. To be honest, Mr. Chairman, some of those early conversations with assembly members and the project team, I was not involved in. So
somewhere else. Okay, thank you. So, okay, next we had question number two. Question number two, in your order, you said the permits. So the way you structured it was question number 1 first, question number 5 second, question number 6 third, if I understood you properly. And then we'll roll back up to number 2. So the second question would be question number 5, permits.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question number 5 is, have you secured all the permits needed for construction? And number 6 is, have sprung structure design plans been reviewed? So I think I'm going to ask Greg to help me with the secures of the permits, because he's been working with not only sprung structure, but with the building official. So I'll have Greg help me with that one.
Mr. Chair, essentially, there are 6 outstanding comments that's holding up the permitting for the structure. The site work permitting, it's all been completed. These are mostly architectural and structural comments that we're just waiting for some responses from the building manufacturer. I can get into each one if you want. They get a little into the weeds.
Briefly, yes, in particular ones that relate to building safety.
So I guess the 2 main ones are wind and seismic loading. And this is an aluminum structure. ASCE 7-16, which is what Anchorage Building Code is based on, only permits steel structures. We don't have anything in the code provision for aluminum. So the manufacturer is in the position of providing an alternate means and methods to show that it can withstand wind and seismic loading and snow of Anchorage. They've proposed a few alternatives for this route, and we just haven't seen the submittals yet. The other comments, the other 4 issues are basically QC statements from the manufacturer, a few minor changes to the drawings. A structural model was missing in input, nothing major. Just really the 2 alternate means and methods relating to the loading are the ones that are standing out.
Right. So those of us who've been in Anchorage long enough remember when the change point tent came down because of snow, and that didn't have people residing in it. There were just a handful of people that were using it as a recreational facility. And so that issue for me has been a concern since July of 2021, and a conversation I have raised a number of times. So thank you. It's good to understand it's still outstanding. So Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I guess it's new information to me that our building code only allows steel structures. So it's surprising to me that we have already purchased a structure that doesn't meet our building code. So I appreciate the look into, it sounds like essentially alternative compliance to make sure that we're meeting that. I wonder, for those who have been involved longer, was there initial discussion with the building department before this structure was purchased?
Through the chair, Ms. Brawley, I do believe that there were, as a matter of fact, when the original 35% design plans came in, they got some preliminary review, and one of the things that they required was an additional support through the aluminum structure to be added to that, and that was included in the 65%, which is currently under review.
It was discussed, and Sprung threatened me with a lawsuit because I said that their design wouldn't meet our code requirements as designed. And so they took real offense to that. And I'm here to say we're still waiting for them to come up with an alternative that demonstrates that their building isn't going to harm someone in our weather. So I'll never forget that moment for the folks from Sprung who are listening. Yeah, Ms. Brawley and then Ms. Branca.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to state too, as one of 5 new members, I'm certainly not speaking for the other new members on this body, but for myself, it's been very difficult to, not having this history and knowing that this project has gone through so many iterations. So partly why I'm asking these questions is because this is what I need to make a decision. And so any information that the administration can provide between now and Tuesday, not going through all of the history that's already happened, but I think just giving us, again, a floor plan. Some of the things that may have been presented in the past, but 5 of us have not seen before, except if we were tracking as a member of the public. And I think the lack of those things is really adding to a lot of uncertainty to even understand what this project is. Thank you.
Ms. Branca. Oh, wait, someone want to answer?
Through the chair, Thank you to Ms. Brawley and to the new members. If I don't want to assume that what you want to receive or what you don't want to receive, but if you want a set of floor plans, because I know back in the day we have given a lot of detail and a lot of pictures and a lot of floor plans out, but we're happy to, the floor plan, some pictures, some general, whatever it is that you're looking for, we were happy to provide it because it's not something we have to create. It's just something we need to share.
Ms. Braga.
So wind would be my biggest concern. I know snow is big, but a lot of people don't realize the east side when we're hearing about hillside winds to this, mile per hour. We have an anemometer on our house, which is very close to where this navigation center will be, and it is usually the high point of what we're seeing for hillside and turning an arm winds. So it's concerning to me because that's a big structure.
We were also very concerned of that, and a lot of the information that we've received from other locations, one of them being Dade County, Miami, where they set these things up in hurricane zones. And so, they're very competent, and we have them in other locations where it's very windy and snowy. And I think, as Mr. Soule was mentioning, and we're just waiting for responses from the manufacturer to share that information with us so that it can make the building official and development services comfortable that it will stand up to the wind and the snow.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Baranga, I would also add that we have been in touch with the manufacturer. They have made certain submittals that, gives the building official a reasonable amount of confidence that this building will be able to meet the loading requirements. We just are waiting a formal submittals.
And just one correction, where it may be located, not where it will be located. So, Mr. Cross.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the structural components. So I understand that oftentimes when you're trying to get a commercial project built in a short time frame, you get your F&F permits first, and you're still working through your structural compliance. And since that hasn't been completed yet, if we anticipate adjustments, is the additional cost in order to make sure the property is properly built to the standards required under our structural review, would those additional costs come out of the contingency fee, or how do we allocate for those projected changes? Because there's going to be a cost involved since we don't have approval.
Through the chair, Mr. Cross, you're exactly right. The cost, the contingency, that's part of the contingency there. But in the site work and the concrete work, that's in those other line items, we anticipate that we'll be able to pick it up where we left off. We've had the current foundation inspected, the rebar inspected. Currently, we can still use it, so we don't have to replace any of that. We just got to build the other three sides and pour the pad, and that is in this piece. But the contingency is, in the event that, a lot of unknowns. It could be a delay in delivery of materials, and things may go up. It could be a variety of things. That's why we have the contingency, and every project has a contingency. It's just that this one just has a little bit. 12% is not uncommon. So that's where we're at.
And then just to follow up with that, thank you. And that was my next question. It was just, listen, the materials that have been sitting on the site have been there for now over a year. They've been exposed to snow. They've been to that. And so there's been a thorough evaluation to make sure that last time I was out there, I remember they had some forms ready to pour concrete, but the concrete had been poured. And so, a lot of that will either have to be corrected, adjusted, perhaps the rebar that's been out has been exposed and been overly corroded. So all that has been examined, so that I'm just looking at these additional costs that oftentimes when you forego a project for a delayed, profound amount of time, that often creep up.
Through the chair, Mr. Cross. So the site work is done. In terms, all the soil's been placed, compacted, utilities have been run, the footers have been poured, and the rebar was left exposed for 1 year. We did have a structural inspector go out and look at the rebar, and there isn't any issues with it.
Ms. Zalato.
Thank you. I got a little bit lost on the timing of us getting kind of the A-OK from the building official and where, if this is go. Like, I guess I'm a little bit concerned that we would say, okay, continue building out this pad and doing this construction when we don't have the building official's full sign off. So is it something, I guess, typical? Like, if this was a private project, would we be allowing the private project to proceed without full authority to put up the type of structure that's contemplated?
To the chair, Ms. Zaltel, it's pretty common to issue an FNF ahead of the full structural approval. FNF stands for footing and foundations. Generally, it's considered at risk, but it's at the building official's discretion if he feels that the footing and foundation design is adequate, then he can approve a partial approval for footing and foundations.
Okay, and then I have to ask the obvious question. What happens if this structure doesn't pass muster? What do we do then?
Through the chair, Ms. Salatel. So the footing and foundation design should be just fine. If the structure doesn't pass the loading, it could be a matter of adding an additional bay. There's the way that these rafters are spaced in bays, something like that. But there should be no concern with the footing and foundation. Does that answer your question?
No, I
Okay.
mean, the structure goes on top of the footing and foundation, right? And so you're telling me there could be remediation or other steps or changes to the structure in order to satisfy whatever wind, seismic, et cetera. Is that what I'm hearing? And so it would just be possibly additional cost, or is there the chance that we would do the footing and foundation and just never be able to erect the structure for habitability purposes?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Braun, as Lance, Mr. Wilbur mentioned, there was some preliminary analysis done ahead of time, and they actually did add the extra rafter section in order to kind of mitigate this in the future. Which is one of the reasons that we issued the at-risk FNF. So we don't anticipate there's going to be any issues with the structure that's going to require a redesign of the foundation.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm just confused then why the building official hasn't signed off.
Ms. Zaltel, as I mentioned, so it is an occupied structure. So we need to have very good documentation in the file that shows that the building can meet all the loading requirements of Anchorage. And so he won't sign off until he has those formal submittals.
And I will add to that, we were on that path to get that process, to get the information that we required, the building official required to make those final decisions like we would for any particular building. And then when we stopped, put the project on pause, we put everything on pause. We stopped the team that was doing the submittals, working with the manufacturer to get the information that we needed to complete the review that Mr. Soule is mentioning. I mean, we basically took the contractor, told him to get off the site. We stopped everything. And so we need to pick that back up and complete it where we left off. And that's kind of where we are. Information needed to be complete.
So before
That's where we are.
Brawley jump in, I have a very rudimentary question. I just searched my emails for a notification of who the building official is. Doesn't exist. The last building official I'm aware of doesn't work with the municipality anymore. Who's the building official?
The acting building official is Ross Nuffsinger.
Oh, it's Ross.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the prudence of stopping work on this project, given, as we said, the history of what happened. However, it does strike me that it feels like we're in a bit of a chicken and egg situation because we need some information to understand if this project is feasible. And I understand also that that means that some of that information has not been prepared. And so I think that's partly maybe why we're all struggling right now. But my specific question, I guess it occurred to me, so we're talking a lot about the structure of the building, but really we're talking about a site. And I think in addition to a floor plan, I'm not asking for the full binder of information, but the floor plan for the structure itself, and then really a basic understanding of the site plan, because I know a lot of what we've heard about, certainly what we're experiencing now, what we experienced with the Sullivan is a lot of concerns, not so much what happens in the building. Certainly that's a concern. Also how to manage outside of the building. And I'll acknowledge that part of that is an operating question, right? It has to do with that. But are there any capital costs? Essentially, what happens outside this building? Is it just a parking lot? Are there auxiliary structures? To what extent is the design of the project really speaking to the specific kind of operational needs for this facility? And is there a cost associated with that? Fencing, all those kinds of things.
I'll be brief. So basically, it's there's the facility itself. There's a parking lot. There's a cleared lot next to it. There is a fence around the outside. And I think that's pretty much as simple as it is. We can, I mean, the landscaping is pretty minimal. And I think, we have ingress and egress. It's right next to the existing police station, for those who don't know, down over at Elmore. So, I mean, but we can certainly get you some graphics for sure.
Thank you. And I ask, because again, I appreciate that most of addressing safety and security concerns would be an operational question, but just thinking about costs and things that need to be factored in.
So I'm going to take us back slightly. We heard that there have been some alternative designs mentioned that could meet wind or snow load that included additional rafters. Were those costs factored into this spreadsheet, or are those costs in addition?
They were factored in.
Okay, thank you. So next question on the list was question number 2. It's in the 4th position. Have you identified a fund source to pay for all of the above capital costs? If so, what is the source? And will we repurpose prior appropriations? And I think this will take us to the end of the conversation, because I think there's a lot here. But let's begin. Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you see, OMB Director Courtney Peterson is not here. She has prepared the draft AIM, which you have before you. I understand this is probably going to be where we're focusing on. So I'm not the OMB Director. I will do my best to present to the body. I see Mr. Gates. Does he have a question? You want me to stop, Mr. Constant?
Sure. First, Mr. Gates, then Ms. Zalatil.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to cut off Mr. Byrd, but I was going to add something to Mrs. Brawley's question about site plan. And just briefly, I believe that this site already went through a conditional use process, and there's a planning case online with all the documents related to that. And but I'm not recalling if that process completed and the conditional use permit for the land use was approved.
Through the chair, Mr. Gates, you are correct. There was a requirement for a conditional use permit, and that conditional use permit is coming to a close as well. Again, we stopped everything, and in anticipation of the assembly, potentially funding this, we want to make sure that we are ready to go as much as we can to the best of our ability, and one of those is the conditional use permit effort. So,
What do you mean by coming to a close?
making a decision about whether or not we are going to advance this project or not. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting to.
Right, you were referring specifically to the conditional use process. So,
Oh, yes.
and I just didn't understand what coming to a close meant on that. That conditional use process was amazing because it happened without members knowing, which is pretty surprising. Ms. Zalatil.
Thank you. So thank you for Ms. Pearson preparing this memorandum and these fund sources. What is going to be key in order to really consider this, though, are fund certifications. While I appreciate having the ARs listed, I don't know if the funds are as associated with each AR are in the various accounts. So maybe something a little bit different. So I'm going to suggest something, and you can take it or leave it or talk with Mr. Thurn, is while we usually do a fund certification on the ordinance itself, if we could also maybe have like a secondary bullet under each of these, kind of just certifying what account these funds exist in. So we can basically connect it back to, all the pieces together, because it's a lot of moving pieces. Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Colhase, I think, said exactly what I was going to point out to Member Zalatel. Thank you for that direction. I think my understanding is that we are preparing in the OMB office an S1 version that does exactly what Member Zalatel is pointing out, which is fund certifying all of this information that's included in the AIM. The AIM simply gives a little more context. So, Mr. Chair, if you'd like me to run through here, I can regarding the scheduled reappropriations. I think Ms. Johnson is probably going to be able to speak to the operations costs more so than this sheet.
I don't know that we're even going to get to the operational cost conversation because there are a number of items in this list that have to be discussed.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I completely agree. One item that surprised me as well was the I think the wireless portion that was supposed to go to some of the community rec centers. I think the direction that the administration heard was we need to find out what funding is available. And there's 4 main buckets on here. It's the ARPA reappropriations. It's what's left over from the initial appropriation for the NAV Center back a year ago. There's $2 million in ATAX, and then there's the beetle kill, which I think is the second bullet point. So that's what we have laid out as potential fund sources without going to the fund balance.
So, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And before we dive into, because I know there's certainly a lot of questions about each individual source, but I'm trying to square 2 things that I've heard just this week in other committee hearings. One is that we are out of money and that we don't have a clear source of funds for our emergency cold weather shelter plan this winter. So this seems to be in basic conflict with that statement. If and how much of these are available. The other one is that we heard just yesterday that that there's only a very small amount, at least of ARPA Tranche 1 funds available. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand, because I'm hearing 2 different things, and it's very difficult for me to understand how we are going to pay for this, let alone how it will be operated and paid for. And so it seems like there's 2 different statements depending on what priority we're talking about. And then I'll also just flag that I added up the totals of these. It appears to be about 11 million total. So before we dive into these individual ones, I still see that there's a $1 million gap just to pay for the capital costs. And again, setting aside the operating expense, even if it's for next year.
Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to Member Brawley. Yes, I see the Assembly's role, as you know, is if there's a reappropriation, the administration can't do that. This is something that we have to come to you to, and you must approve if these are going to be reappropriations that are made. It is a policy call that is absolutely within your branch to make. That, and I think that's consistent with what I said yesterday about the ARPA having administrative reappropriations for the administration of ARPA going on to 2026. So I don't see an inconsistency. We are presenting options that lay within what has already been appropriated, and it's up to the body to make the policy call where that money is going to go. And that's what we've tried to prepare today.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally then, if we're looking at how do we deal with our needs for shelter, what this strikes me as is we either choose to shelter folks this winter with some of these funds, or we're paying for part of this capital project that will not be stood up this winter. And so again, this is where I'm trying to square kind of where do we put our funding priorities, given that it is our purview to reappropriate.
All right, so I have a couple of people in the queue. Did you want to respond? Yeah, please.
Through the chair to Ms. Brawley, I think to your first question, when I spoke at the Housing and Homelessness Committee that we did not have adequate funding, the reason I didn't include a lot of these costs is these are one-time funding, and we're building out infrastructure that we cannot afford year over year, and we have not identified any annualized funding for emergency cold weather shelter. So in my opinion, at least alongside the administration, one-time funding should be used for one-time projects, especially in a capital cost, rather than building out an infrastructure for emergency cold weather shelter and hoping to find new money year over year. If that's the will of the body, obviously we would concur.
All right, so I have Mr. Myers and Mr. Salt, myself, Ms. Eltel. Go ahead, Mr. Myers. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Salt.
Thank you. I was just curious for Ms. Johnson, with what we heard the other day for the winter plan, is the navigation center still needed? And also, if it is needed, then at some point down 3-4 years down the road, it's no longer needed. What would we
So, Mr. Salt, I could actually answer that question. I've had conversations at length with the police chief, and that building is perfectly suited, if it's at that location, to secure heavy equipment that they use for that needs to be kept very secure and on site. And so there is a purpose if the need is no longer there. Was that your answer?
That was part of it. The other part is do we even still need a shelter given the information that Johnson shared yesterday about the emergency cold weather plan?
Ms. Johnson.
Through the chair to Mr. Solt, yes, I do believe we need a year-round shelter, and currently I believe we do need a navigation center component. One of the questions that we brought up at Housing and Homelessness is where do people enter into a non-congregate setting? We don't currently have a single point of access, and we're trying to determine that. Had this facility been up and running, we would have been able to have a single point of access. People could walk up to the Tudor Elmore shelter and then be re-navigated to non-congregate settings if this were to have occurred already. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Ms. Altel is next, then myself.
So to respond to that last comment, I'm really concerned about that comment because it doesn't require a single point of access, a physical point of access. Family Shelter right now has a telephone number that slates people in line that could be extrapolated to single adults, also outreach and using coordinated entry. We have many tools in our toolbox that don't require a multi-million-dollar facility. I want to dive back into this memorandum though. Mr. Byrd, thank you for acknowledging that these are policy calls. And what I'm really struggling with is these are policy calls that were already made and we want to undo them. And they were debated. They were part of larger packages and negotiations to really ensure that we were addressing a number of priorities within the municipality. And so it feels really difficult now to take all that work and all of that expectation in the community that's been, these were appropriations that should have been moving toward and going out the door. So we created expectation in the community, particularly around the $2 million that was towards, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point. That was additional early prevention money. And one of the reasons that appropriation occurred, and it was sponsored by myself and Ms. Quinn Davidson at the time, is because early prevention money previously didn't get out the door. And we know if we don't make upstream investments, we're always going to be in a crisis situation. And I realize it says the health department can't get this done. Then I would frankly rather see it roll over into fund balance for next year and we can still make the same investment to simply pull the policy choice of this body into, frankly, a crisis situation is very contrary to the policy call made by the body at the time to do this. So I actually don't need a response to that. That's just how I feel about this memorandum, is that you're undercutting all of the policy calls already made.
I just heard from a member that they don't have access to this AM. Is it possible that it's not on the website? So can we have the AIM draft emailed out so that we can get it posted up on the website and members can have it? Because there's probably more people that want to talk about this. Ms. Johnson.
Through the chair, I'm going to offer a response to the $2 million that was appropriated of ATAX funding for this use. It was appropriated during first quarter budget revisions. When that happened, it was mid-April, I believe. And the response to us was, we want the Anchorage Health Department to dream big. This was a one-time funding mechanism. It's not year over year like our previous alcohol tax for this purpose. So when we came back to dream big, I had asked the movers of this, do you think that we could use this for an annual grant expenditure period starting January 1st through 12/31? This is a lot of money. And so you're asking nonprofits to staff up, get their programs in place and to dream big, but we're only giving them limited amount of time. They have until the end of this year to spend it. We didn't feel like that was very fair. And so we came back and asked, can we have an annual execution? The truth is if this rolls over into fund balance, it will not be able to be reappropriated until April, and we'll be back in the same situation. And so we've been working with OMB to try and figure out whether we put out an RFGP this year, which we plan to do, and then use this funding for execution. We have run into some code hiccups with how ATAX cannot go into a rolling fund. So I don't want to say that the Anchorage Health Department can't do it, but we have faced some challenges with it.
That can't be true because other prevention funding is slated for 2-year funding. I mean, we got that for other prevention funds. It was in the last set of grants. It was intended to be 2-year funding. So I know you've got mechanisms to be able to do this. It can't just be one pot of money that doesn't make it possible. So I'm really frustrated because it feels like the alcohol tax just becomes the piggy bank for homelessness, and that's not appropriate. This passed the voters because it had multiple prongs, and it feels like any prong other than homelessness has been really hard to get implemented, whether that's 24/7 on the mobile crisis team or getting timely prevention funds out the door. And I don't want this project to be another reason we're not focusing on all dedications for the alcohol tax.
And I would just offer, we're going into year 3 now where we hear from the department that we can't spend this money. And we have been making these grants, we've been making these monies available, and every year now it's the same thing. Well, we can't get to it until 6 months, and so it's not worth it. We've been asking, I thought that we had a kind of a working plan that by the end of the year, we would already have awards for next year that are contingent upon funds available so that we don't run up against this problem. But this is frustrating. Now I'm going to jump in with myself in the queue right now. In the light of current events, we're proposing now to remove, we have a proposal now before us to remove $1 million from beetle kill mitigation. I can't even fathom us contemplating doing that when we now have an American city that no longer exists, that the worst death by fire in over a century is now before us as to be contemplated. I have emailed Chugash Electric and the fire chief to ask, what are we going to do about this? But our primary response to that, and we've been working at it for 4 years, is to tackle that. So now we're talking about taking those funds away. And this facility, as anybody who knows and will recognize, is literally right in a place where the fire will take off if we don't deal with it. And so that's one issue that I have. And now the one that Mr. Byrd pointed out, the $400,000. This document makes a liar out of me. This document 100% makes me into a liar because I have reported regularly, quarterly, to the Fairview Community Council and the Mountain View Community Council that this project to purchase Wi-Fi was well underway, and we were just waiting for the delivery of materials that were on back order because of the manufacturing crisis. And so if all of a sudden we see $400,000 is available, that means we never spent a dime of that money, and that means that I'm a liar because of this municipal administration. And I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I can't even believe this document. And so, but it is what I expected in some ways, because there is no other money available other than the money that we set out for very important priorities that were set out to save lives, to improve lives, and to prevent future instances. And so I don't know what the answer is for Tuesday night, but I'm going to have to sweat this out because I hate being made a liar. Anyone else wish to speak on this? Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I appreciate that we need to figure out some kind of year-round shelter in this community because we're experiencing the effects of not having one, or not having enough, I should say, because I want to recognize we do have shelters being run already that are serving the populations they serve. But in terms of the funding, I guess the other question that I have to ask, knowing that typically we use bonds, we use voter-approved bonds to pay for capital projects for facilities, and I know our community manager and Mr. Wilbur, you are both very familiar with that. So I think my question is probably to Mr. Byrd for the mayor's office. Have you talked with staff about the possibility of putting this on the bond, whether it's for 2024 or a future year, because that is typically how we pay for capital projects?
Through the chair to Member Brawley, I know it has been discussed. Kent or Lentz, if you have a better answer, all I know is that it has been discussed.
Okay, so we are 2 minutes to the end of this meeting. I don't know if we still haven't gotten to the conversation about, okay, so we spend 17 million plus on a temporary structure. Some of us would call a tent. I know that offends the Sprung people, but that doesn't get to the $8 million a year annually. And so we heard yesterday that we have no money for a winter shelter plan. We heard that yesterday loud and clear. And so what's the difference between this and the winter shelter plan?
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, I think one of the differences is that emergency cold weather shelter is sheltering a larger number of people. We're also talking about non-congregate versus this location being congregate. You're also not receiving the level of services that this facility would during emergency cold weather season. Rough estimate, if we go back to question number 3, there was a little bit of confusion because we had initially presented a very low number, and that was prior to me stepping into this role. And then you said, come back, give us an actual number. We presented that number, and now there's a comment about it being, it was too high. So on the low end, it's about 5.4 million. And on the high end, it's about 7.9 compared to emergency cold weather sheltering. I mean, there's quite a few variances, but I never took this funding into account for that plan because my comment still stands that we need to set aside annualized funding for this type of project versus using one-time funding and being in the same position next year scrambling for money.
Yeah, I don't think I would disagree that we do need a small shelter additional to the 3rd Avenue site once everything is in place. I just don't know how we can spend everything we have on that. Ms. Braga.
Well, I just wanted to echo Chair Constant's comments about the spruce bark beetle and the location that this might be at being ripe for forest fire. And I've been told several times that plan for egress of the Campbell Airstrip, Basher Road people was in the works. And there would be absolutely no way you take away this spruce bark beetle, you have no egress going on that I've been told really on paper. You're talking about it, asking military, but we're going to absolutely have Lahaina incident if that isn't taken care of. And then I was also looking at, I know the Alaska Native Heritage Center feels very badly about their treatment, that they're tucked way over on the east side, and there's money in here for public transportation to get people to the Native Heritage Center. And I know that's going to sit very poorly with Emily Edenshaw.
Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to highlight the Native Heritage Center as well in terms of just these particular things. But rather than highlight individual items, let me just go to the big question that I have, because I heard it repeated twice, which was basically, we don't want to use one-time funding to do things that require annualized costs. Unless I misunderstood that, I heard that twice. But unless I'm misunderstanding, that is exactly what we're proposing here, to use one-time funding to create a thing that has an annualized cost that we don't have funding for. So I just wanted to just be clear that that's what I heard 2 times, that there's some unwillingness to use one-time funding, and I agree with that, for programs that don't have annualized funding mechanisms. But this is exactly what we're being proposed, because we're already at almost $20 million just on paper, and we don't have a funding mechanism to run whatever's being proposed, let alone the operators to run whatever's being proposed. So I just wanted to put it out there. I think my position is extremely clear about this, and I've been extremely clear in public and in private about where this is going to land for my vote. Thank you.
Okay, so hot seat for everybody. Thank you for being here and being willing to take this on. I wish this AIM had been here before so we could have contemplated a bit more. I think that the members of the public, especially those folks who live around the places where this thing has blown up this summer, are demanding an answer, and I don't know that this is the answer. I look forward to the ongoing conversation. This will be before us Tuesday night. I don't anticipate it gets delayed for another meeting. It's always possible. 7 members can do anything they want on that dais. And with that, we are adjourned.